7. Responsibility and law. A central aspect of biblical law is summed up in a single sentence. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Deuteronomy 24:16. This law is cited in 2 Kings 14:6 and 2 Chronicles 25:4 as the authority for King Amaziah's action in sparing the children of his father's murderers. Jeremiah emphasized the same doctrine, Jeremiah 31:29-30, as did Ezekiel 18:20. Wright's comment on this law is of interest. Quote, "Such a law as this seems superfluous in modern society when the individual is the primary unit and the sense of community solidarity is weak or entirely lacking. In patriarchal and semi-nomadic life, however, the sense of community responsibility was very strong, particularly that of the family. A nomadic blood feud could annihilate a whole family for a crime of one of its members. For exceptional cases of this in Israel, see Joshua 7:24 and 25, 2 Samuel 21, 1-9." End quote. Wright is correct in stating that nomadic blood feuds denied the principle inherent to this law. But the same menace to this law exists in another form today. He is wrong, moreover, with respect to Achan, Joshua 7:24-25. In Achan's case, the gold and silver hidden in the earth in the midst of the tent required the complicity of every member of the family. His interpretation of 2 Samuel 21, 1-9 is also faulty. The common practice of antiquity was to punish, penalize, or execute the entire families of some offenders. To analyze the law, it is important to recognize certain central aspects of it. First, responsibility is an aspect of every law system. Someone must be held responsible for offenses. If there is no responsibility somewhere, then no law enforcement is possible. Who is responsible is the important question, and the answer is a religious answer. Responsibility can be attached to the family, the community, the environment, the gods, or to the person. Where the responsibility is placed makes for a fundamental difference in the social order. Second, the biblical doctrine is, as Deuteronomy 24:16 makes clear, one of individual responsibility. It is the essence of sin, according to Genesis 3:9-13, to attempt to evade individual responsibility. Adam and Eve refused to acknowledge their guilt. They shifted the responsibility to another, Adam blaming Eve and God, Eve blaming the serpent. The godly man acts responsibly and assumes the responsibility for his actions. Third, related to the question of responsibility is the basic one: responsibility to whom? If man is responsible, to whom is he responsible? To the family, to the community, or to the state? The biblical doctrine of responsibility holds that man's primary responsibility is to God, secondarily to his fellow men. It is God who confronts Adam and who at every turn confronts man with his sovereign claims and his total law. Fourth, in terms of this law, guilt cannot be shifted to others or passed on to the people around a man. Guilt is non-transferable. A disposition or nature can be inherited, but not guilt. Man inherits from Adam the total depravity of his nature, but his guilt before God is entirely his own, even as Adam had to bear his own guilt. This distinction between guilt and nature is fundamental to biblical doctrine and law. It is absent in such legal systems as that of Islam. Since the law deals with guilt and punishes the guilty, the non-transferable nature of guilt in biblical law is of central importance. Where guilt is transferable, punishment is also transferable. This is the essence of the principle of the blood feud. If a Hatfield commits an offense, then all Hatfields share in the guilt and all are punished. Similarly, if all Americans were guilty of President Kennedy's assassination, then all Americans must, according to this pagan theory, be punished. Responsibility, guilt, and punishment are inseparable in law. Where there is responsibility for an offense, there is guilt, and there also punishment or penalties must be applied. Today, this doctrine of individual responsibility has been undercut by the theory of evolution. Basic to evolutionary theory is environmentalism. Man is a product of his environment and has evolved in relationship to a changing environment and its actions upon him. As a result, not only is man a product of his environment, but he is also a creature of his environment rather than of God. Man is what an evolving world has made of him, and man's actions are a product of that environment and its molding of man. This means that the guilt for man's actions rests with his environment, his social and personal world, and it is this world which is punished when man sins. Thus, society is blamed for the conduct of delinquents and criminals, and parents for the sins of their children. Punishment then falls on society and on parents. In such a scheme of things, the lawless are absolved of guilt, and the guilty are made innocent. Does the Bible teach nothing of community responsibility? As a matter of fact, biblical law does assert community responsibility, a responsibility to see that justice is done. There is community guilt if justice is not done. First, there is community responsibility for justice. Immediately after the law concerning individual responsibility comes one of the many laws concerning justice. Thou shalt not pervert the judgment of the stranger, nor of the fatherless, nor take the widow's raiment to pledge. Deuteronomy 24:17. Where there is a family, the family cannot be held guilty for the criminal's offense. Where there is no family, the community must not take advantage of the person's helplessness. If a foreigner, the quote-unquote stranger, is on trial, alone and without friends, his right to justice remains unchanged. His helplessness can no more be exploited than the wealth of a criminal's relatives can be confiscated or their persons attacked. Justice is not social, it is individual. The doctrine of social justice goes hand in hand with the doctrine of social guilt. Social justice is not only an attack on individual responsibility, but also on the immunity of the innocent. Second, since the community responsibility means that justice must be enforced, it follows that community guilt ensues where justice is not done. This is dealt with in Deuteronomy 21:1-9. If a murder cannot be solved, the whole community bears the responsibility as well as the unknown murderer. The murderer bears the responsibility before God for the murder, and the community for failing to avenge the murder, for failing to bring the murderer to justice. Since the offense is against God, the leaders of the community make atonement to God for the offense, so that no guilt be incurred by them. In brief, a community could not be indifferent to any offense in their midst, and crimes going unpunished had to have ritual atonement. The form of this law is that of the Old Testament sacrificial system. It is no longer binding on us. The substance of the law is, however, still valid. The community has a responsibility to God to see that justice is done, and it also has a responsibility to the victims of the crime. A comment by Waller is of interest here. Quote, "It is remarkable that to our time, the most effectual remedy against outrages of which the perpetrators cannot be discovered is a fine upon the district in which they occur." End quote. This is in keeping with the purpose of this law. Similarly, restitution to victims of the crime is an essential part of the community's atonement, as is the prayerful petition for God's mercy by the officers of state. The latter is essential and basic, because the primary offense is always against God in any violation of law. As Ehrlich has noted, the Bible does not use the word crime. Every offense is called a transgression. Quote, "The absence of the term crime indicates that the will of God is the sole source of all the law, and thus all punishable acts constitute sins which are in violation of God's law." End quote. The concept of transgression is being replaced by the doctrine of social conditioning and compulsive behavior. The lifespan of such an environmental concept is relatively brief, because its impact is suicidal for any society. Moreover, basic to this pagan concept is a thorough impersonalism. Man, being an evolutionary product of an impersonal universe, is basically governed by an impersonal world and impersonal forces. In biblical law, man, as the creature of the personal and triune God, transgresses personally against that God in his every sin. Every offense involves responsibility because it's personal and is a transgression. Law that is geared to personal responsibility is respectful of persons. They are the central and essential figures of society. Things are not in charge. People are responsible. Law that is humanistic and evolutionary is disrespectful of persons. People are not in charge. Things govern the world. Men, therefore, are treated callously by the social scientists who seek to play the role of gods by governing things and manipulating people. After all, why should people who have always been ruled by things object to the rule of elite men? The de-Christianization of society is also the depersonalization of man.